Hey, this is Jay.
And this is Chelsea.
Welcome to the Shifting Perceptions podcast.
We are bringing you inspiration to live a more creative lifestyle because our favorite people are the ones that choose the path less traveled. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 17 of the Shifting Perceptions podcast. This week, we were here with Azul Terronez, a friend and just inspiring human being.
Yeah, so who exactly is Azul? So Azul's a published author, which led him to doing a TEDx talk, which has gotten something like 1.2 million views. He's also a professional book coach. He's actually my book coach. That's how we met.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Azul is basically the epitome of what we bring on this podcast because when it comes to shifts, his story is so inspiring. I mean, he's going to blow your minds.
How many more leaps could you possibly have than he had?
And really, like, doing it in the thick of when most of us are so scared to do it. Like, he had kids, he had a family. It was just like one of these amazing, like, I can't lie about my life anymore. And there's nothing more inspiring than that.
I mean, imagine having the security that he did as a school principal and a house and a wife and the setup life that he did to go on to reinvent every single aspect of his entire life. It's incredible.
Yeah. So listening to him talk, I mean, you guys are going to love this. It's just incredibly, it's going to make you want to take all sorts of leaps and bounds in your own life and your career. But I love how this sort of incorporates his very personal side with this phenomenal career he now has with just coaching writers and helping people find the book inside of them is his thing. He's good at it.
He has such a passion for teaching people and for like pulling out their unique story. Like I know he's done that with me. I've been working with him for a couple of years now. I'm working on my first book and like being like, you know, in the trenches with him, working on some, you know, really vulnerable parts of my life and trying to translate that into a book has been such a cathartic and interesting experience. And like seeing how he works, you know, firsthand, just gives me so much more respect for what he does.
Yeah. And then just even talking about how through all of this, he's this phenomenal of a writer and a coach, and he's completely dyslexic. And that story is just so relatable for so many people, which it's interesting. I feel like dyslexia has come up a few times on this podcast, but he really jumps into it. So I don't know. You guys are going to love every part of this. I'm excited for you to hear it.
You know what? While you guys are listening, I would encourage you to check him out on Instagram at Azul Terronez, Terronez. You could check out his lifestyle and see what he's created. I mean, just scanning through it right now, he's like, here I am in Portugal, here I am in Puerto Rico, here I am in wherever the heck that is. I don't know. It's like every picture is like palm trees and sunsets and historical cities. It's just incredible. So check him out. Also, please hit subscribe so you don't miss the next episode.
Awesome. Jump right in, guys.
Hey, Azul. Thanks for joining us. We're like really excited about talking to you, and this has been like a long anticipated conversation. Going to be cool to have Chelsea jump in on one of our calls.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited as well. Like to get the two of you in one call. It's amazing.
I know, and uninterrupted. It's pretty exciting. We can sit and chat.
So it's been like a couple of years of like getting to know you, which I know neither one of us like planned on, but a year or two ago we got connected through a mutual friend, author Steve Scott, who we just spoke to on our podcast, who I've actually known since college, and he was talking to me because I was starting a book and was having some tough challenges come up as a newbie author, and he said, you know, what do you think about getting a book coach? And threw your name out there, and we connected, and you were living in, I believe, Shanghai at the time, if memory serves correctly. Right. And we just really connected, and I'm excited to dive in.
Yeah, me too. I'm thrilled. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, so we kind of want to start, we're going to go a little backwards in your story, I think, because we do want to touch upon what you're doing now. We are always fascinated by your traveling the world and making it all happen while you're on the road. But I think we want to hear about the top things you're focusing on. Like, are you still writing? Is it all coaching? I know you're doing a ton of public speaking, but let's just touch upon your top things right now.
Yeah, so I'm still writing. The reason I really wanted to start writing was it's so easy for me to be introverted and hide behind the classroom because I was a teacher for so many years. And so writing for me has always been what I wanted to do, even since I was a sixth grader, but I never was good at it. Or at least that's what I perceived. My perception was probably off. But the book I'm working on now was a book that's caused a lot of resistance, but it's really important to me, which is the book that's called What Makes a Good Teacher Great. And I've gone back and forth. I've written versions of it, not liked it, started again, redone it. And so I'm trying to grow this year in 2019 to do more of my own writing, spending so much time coaching authors. I coach people one-on-one and I coach them in groups so they can get their book idea out of their head and onto the page and get their book out into the world, which is really great. But what it's really become is writing is more of a transformational process for me. So when I help people, I'm helping them kind of transform through things in their life, and the book is just our lens. So we build these really wonderful relationships, kind of, I think the way Jay and I think we've built a relationship through this process, because we get to know each other really well. And it's a vulnerable place to be a writer, to share your heart, your doubts, your fears, your struggles, your wonders with somebody who you maybe just met. Takes a lot of courage. And so I still enjoy doing that as well. But yeah, being an author has really changed things for me, because people have asked me to speak and I've got to travel the world doing that sort of speaking and coaching and writing. So I want to keep doing more of that for sure.
What I find like really interesting, like knowing you, is you talk about being like, introverted, and yet you have this like TED Talk that has, what is it, like over 1 million something,
it's like 1.2
views
right now,
or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like kind of, it's like, I don't know, is it I guess it's common, because I feel like I have like a public persona as an artist, and yet I feel like I'm extremely introverted. And you talk about like courage, and when I think about you, that's one of the words that comes to mind first, to be totally honest with you. Like knowing your backstory, getting to know you, and you being my book coach has taught me to be more comfortable with being vulnerable and expressing those things. So I don't know, I guess the question would be like, can you give me some examples of how having courage and being more comfortable with your vulnerability has served you, and maybe some specific examples?
Yeah, I think for the longest time it was so much easier to be something. So for example, being a teacher is a thing. Like everyone knows what it is. You don't have to explain it to anyone. You might have to tell them what grade or what subject, but after that, the conversation stops. It's not that people aren't interested. It's just because it's so obvious what it is. Being anything else, being something else, and being attached your identity to your work, to me is really a safe thing. But when you like step from behind a cloak or a facade or a role, you have to show up to be yourself. And I think that's what people do on the page or from a stage or telling their story, their truth. And I think that takes a lot of courage. And so I think what I'm trying to do is, maybe for all the dyslexic kids, because I'm dyslexic. I didn't know I was dyslexic till I was a junior in college. I didn't even know what that word meant. School was always hard, so I never was a person that shined in school. In fact, so it's ironic. I flunked freshman English at UCLA, and yet I became an English teacher. Not because I was good at English. To be honest, I wasn't ever good at English. But what I found when I got there was that kids didn't love writing, and I didn't want them to have that same experience. So to me, having courage is like standing up finally now and saying, well, it's time to write. Because I remember feeling so, maybe not terrified, but so embarrassed that when I started publish students' work in 2008, when Amazon first became open to people, putting themselves out there, and I watched my 13-year-old students become published authors. And I remember the first time a student says, "So where's your book?" Not judgmental or rude. They were literally looking for it. And I said, "I don't have one." And they're like, "Why?" And I didn't have a good answer, except for that I was afraid. And I didn't know if it'd be any good. And I was like, and that would never let them say that. So I knew I had to make a shift. So I think courage is stepping from behind a place of comfort where you feel like you can be somebody else and being yourself on a page. So, or in anywhere, whether it's the page, in the world, in your family. Yeah, so that's a little bit about what I mean by the courage.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I want to talk about the dyslexia thing, because Jay and I actually had a long talk about this. We were listening to
yesterday.
Yesterday we were listening to Jonathan Haidt on Dax Shepard's podcast yesterday, and they were talking about dyslexic, the amount of like celebrities that are dyslexic, or just artists and entertainers, etc. And I actually, I think it's a pretty common path for people who have dyslexia to sort of look at the world a little differently. And if you kind of start to look at it that way, where it's like you've always had to look at things differently because you literally see things differently, you start to see that there's actually these patterns of dyslexic adults that have created a different lifestyle for themselves, like not necessarily going down these normal paths, but they're actually looking at things from the other side. Does that make sense?
Yeah. That's interesting. The way it gets related to a kid's life, a young person's life, is that you can't read. So if you can't read by third grade, they don't stop teaching reading. So when I'm in first grade and I still can't read, and I'm in third grade, because you can memorize the small readers they have you read, but by the time you're in third grade, they expect you to be able to read new words like that you've never seen, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't memorize the words I didn't know. So I started finding ways to be successful that wasn't from reading. And one of those ways was to create stories, because stories don't require you to have the right words. So I did start to see the world differently. I started seeing things in a way that I could solve a problem. So people were really surprised that even though I'm dyslexic, I can speed read. So I can read very fast. But it's just because I don't sound out words like everyone. I don't understand. I can't sound out a word to save my life.
That's interesting. So it doesn't hold you back, basically. You don't get stuck. Yeah.
No, and I read diagonally, which some people don't understand either. So I read from
what?
Wait, how do you read diagonally? Explain.
I picture you like standing on a wall sideways.
Explain to me.
Like some kind of like freaky thing you and Steve are into, like standing diagonally on walls.
Teach me your ways. What do you mean?
So like if I look at the top right corner of a page, I look at that and I just track my finger from that top right corner down to the bottom left corner, because I'm scanning the page. I'm consuming large amounts of words and processing it, because I don't have to read word for word. In fact, I can't, so it slows me down if I try to. But I realize your brain can process words faster than you can read them. So I was taught in school to read word by word. So for the longest time, I tried, and I couldn't make sense of words. Words, for me, I try to describe dyslexia. For me, everyone who's dyslexic has a different way that impacts them. So words for me, they don't move. Some dyslexic, they move. Words disappear. So I could be reading a sentence, and a word will just disappear. I can't see it. I know there's a word there because the word after it doesn't make sense, but I don't know what the word is or where it goes. If I take my time, it'll reappear, but I don't know why. I don't know why I can't see the word. But I realized later on, if I read from right to left, I don't have to read in order. I can see the words. I can process really fast. I'm processing the words and not trying to read them as individual symbols. So it's a really interesting concept. So like the way I try to explain to young people who I know who might have dyslexic, for example, you might hear that B's and P's and D's or different letters are flipped around. Mm-hmm. And for the longest time, I didn't understand that until I started becoming a teacher. It's because we're spatial thinkers. So a P, a B, and a D is the same letter. It's just spatially oriented different on the page.
Okay.
So upside down is a B, flip it upside down, it's a B, backwards a D.
Yeah. So did someone have to teach you that? Like, did someone actively teach you the speed reading and the diagonal reading, or is this something that you just created?
I just figured out I could read faster if I didn't try to read in order. And I don't know, right to left didn't matter. Sometimes I don't even track that way. Sometimes I just look at words and I can read whole sections, but because I'm not reading line by line. I started learning speed reading just to kind of understand it. And it made more sense when people teach, because you can learn speed reading in probably an afternoon. It's not complicated.
Yeah.
But most people's eyes can't let go of words. So my job has been much easier because I can't track words. Or single syllables. I just track collections of words. So can't totally explain why it works. But one of the other things I notice is, so I tell people, I was like, the reason letters flip around for me is because they're the same letter on a page. Two-dimensional or flat things are hard for me to see. I can't see it. But if I say, I want you to imagine there's a slice of cake or cheesecake on a plate, right? Most people see it. And I say, good. Where are you seeing it? From the top, from the side, from the bottom? And most people say, oh, I see it, kind of a slice of it, But someone like me, someone who has dyslexia, can see it from any side that you wish. Like it spins in space. It's 3D. So I could see it however you want me to see it.
Yeah.
Upside, from the bottom, from the side, from the top, from around. But seeing it from one side and telling me that's cheesecake, it's really hard for me. So anyways, it's sort of a way I've made up for being able to speed read, even though I can't read simple words. Like people are like, you can't read that word. I'm like, I I can't read that word. They're like, how can you read fast and understand
Yeah,
it?
interesting profession for someone who's getting stuck on individual words.
Right.
I love that.
Yeah. So when I was in class, I'd put a big check mark on the board, and I tell my students, look, this is my spell check. I'm very intelligent. I just can't read certain words. I'm dyslexic. So you'll hear me read. When I did read alouds for class, I would read words wrong, simple words, because I couldn't see them. So my mind, I didn't realize this until later. My compensation is if a word doesn't appear, my mind replaces it with a word that makes sense. So sometimes I'd read a word and say, the man walked to the house, and I'll replace it with the man, and I didn't see walk, I'll say sprint. So it'll make sense, but it's not what the words say. It's not what the author wrote. So at first the kids start correcting me and saying, that's not what it says. I say, you're welcome to correct me. If I say it wrong or I can't pronounce it, I don't take offense. But just know that if you get it, that this word makes sense and you can read it, then let's just keep going. But you never feel bad about interrupting me or pointing out you're my spell checkers. So yeah, that's sort of the compensation.
Well, I want to go back to the vulnerability stuff because I think that the coolest thing that I saw happen, just the transformative side of Jay with this book when he first came to you, was that I think after the first meeting, he expected to talk to you and be like, oh, I have all the answers. This is how I'm going to write my book.
Yeah.
Or this is how I'm going to fix my book. But instead, he was like, I just had the most intense therapy session of my entire life. And it had they didn't even talk about the book, right?
Yeah, so I think like one of the magic powers that Azul has is definitely your empathy and like connection with people, and like maybe it is related to that dyslexic thing where you can see things from different angles that other people can't. I think that maybe that like seeps into other parts of your persona, because I came to you at a time to be vulnerable. We were like really broke. We were really doing bad financially. We had newborns. We weren't sleeping. It was a really tough time, and I had approached my friend Scott, who the world knows as Steve Scott, and said, hey, you know what? You're making a shit ton of money selling books. Maybe if I come up with a quick book, maybe I can make a couple extra dollars to help pay the bills. And so I kind of went to you with that goal in mind, and then you helped me to realize that I had more things to say. I had things within me that I was maybe not proud of or unaware of or afraid to talk about, and you got me approaching the book in a way where I wanted to serve people and help people and find a way to share my story, as opposed to here's a quick fix to make a couple dollars. And that's one of the biggest things you've given me. And I would like for you to kind of share some of your story on what got you there, because you have a fascinating story. You know, you have spoken publicly about being a single gay dad, and currently in our current times that's maybe not as big of a deal, but I know at one point in your life and in the history of the country that was a huge deal. Can you talk about the timeline and some of those aspects of your life?
Yeah, sure. So in regards to like when we showed up to each other and I just started listening for you, I think I do listen for people's stories. Like that's the thing I could pay attention to in the book. I couldn't pay attention to the words, but I can hear the story, and not just the story, but what was behind the story. So what I heard in your voice, and maybe people can understand this more when I share my story. I heard that you had something to say, and that though the need was to make money, what you wanted was to tell your truth, and that's what I heard, or that's what I observed. So yeah, so I had all the things that, and Steve talks about this in his book that he's just finished, is I lived behind a mask in my life, because being a teacher, I was always feeling like I was pretending to be good at this English thing, and I wasn't. And then I got married really young. I think I was 24, and had kids, and had a pretty, what you expect of a traditional life. I became a principal. I had a house, and all these things that seemed great, but on the inside, I was feeling really like I wasn't myself. And luckily for me, I married a woman that was my best friend, which is great. That's what a lot of people would say, but really, truly, it wasn't a marriage of like deep romantic intimacy. It was a deep love and bond that was for each other. So I at 38, though, I knew I couldn't stay married anymore, because I just wasn't being myself. I wasn't being truthful. And the truth was that, I had been in love with a boy that I had in high school. But then he killed himself when he was 19. I was 20. And I thought this is too much pain. Because in the 80s, being out in the 80s was like basically you couldn't get a job. I couldn't, there's no way I could be a teacher. It was a time of, you get that, you get AIDS, you die. Like that was the thing. So I was like, I'm not going to do that. So the life I had was great. I loved my wife. She loved me. We had two great children together. But every day I thought a little bit more about maybe this isn't the life I want. And when it started to become this, maybe I don't want life at all, is when I started to realize I had to do something, because I knew the pain that losing my friend to suicide had caused me. I didn't want anybody else to feel that, but I also didn't know what to do.
Did you consciously like realize each day that you were like living a lie, or did you kind of fool yourself into thinking like, I'll just go through with this facade for the rest of my life?
I thought I would go through it the rest of my life. For that, like I don't have a bad life. It was a great life. I had a good marriage, and compared to a lot of my friends who always complained about their spouse, I was happy. In my physical life, our sex life was great. I wasn't in that way unhappy. I just turned off that part of me because it was safer. It was easier. And I think I numbed myself through work. That's why I worked 80 hours a week. And, being a principal is a great way to numb yourself, because you just don't have any time for yourself. But I also didn't have time for my family either.
Well, so how old were your kids at this point? I don't think I know that timeline.
So, yeah. So by the time I figured I was going to come out, I had left being a principal, which made it a little safer. We were moving to San Diego. My kids were in they were third and fourth grade. Okay. And so I got to San Diego, and I had realized that I just had to tell, my kids are in elementary school. So yeah, I sat my wife down and said, look, I have to tell you, and that I'm gay. And I never said those words to myself before. I never said them out loud to anybody. So, and it was really hard, because we had just moved like the month before, leaving Austin and went to San Diego. So much change had happened. And I think what happened was, a month later, that I was trying to figure this all out, my wife and me said, look, I want to tell you something. I think I'm gay too. And that's when everything shifted, because I was like, wait, how can you be gay too? Like, how did I not know?
Like neither of you saw it coming.
Well, she knew, because I was always vulnerable with her. That's how we became friends. Like, this is really hard, having this guy you care about, and he dies. Like, but we met like through like a religious group. So no one really talked about anything to me, in my mind, important or deep about those kinds of things. So it was really easy not to kind of let that go. So as far as like having to deal with it as an issue. So, and it was easy for her not to, she never really thought about it. I think me coming out gave her courage to actually wonder about her own self. That's why our marriage worked, because, she'd be watching the Laker game. I'd be like, did these drapes go with this? So, it just worked in the household. It just was switched, and it didn't really bother us. So when she came out, it wasn't that I didn't have a clue. It's just I wasn't looking for that. That wasn't I was worried about me, probably.
Yeah.
Did you both have like secret lives going on? Like, were you each like hiding in the corner, like, I don't know, like looking at gay porn, or like
just living your life and just ignoring it, right?
We didn't. I was totally shut down. I not at all. Like, honestly, I think that was the reason why going to like some religious group is because it's very shut off from the world. So it wasn't like I even entertain those things. It was when I stopped being a principal and I started having more time for myself.
Right.
It wasn't that I didn't notice men or notice that I was attracted, but I didn't act on it. I didn't do anything. It
just wasn't an option. You're like, no.
It wasn't an option, because I think sure, porn's always an option for people, but that's like a really clandestine way to have any sort of fantasy fill out. But it wasn't really thinking about it in a real way. It was just an observation. So it wasn't an acting out thing. It was more of like, oh my gosh, we had been married for 15 years. It wasn't like, it was like a couple years into it, before we finally separated in our lives.
So I've heard versions of this story from you in person, and I know that part, but the one part I don't think I've ever asked you is like, what precipitated you having that conversation with your wife? Like, was there a moment when you were like, I can't live this lie anymore, that got you to have that conversation, to say, I can't live this lie anymore?
I really think it was the day I considered driving off a cliff and not going home. Like, what would be easier? I would ruin my family if I told
Mm.
people that I was thinking this. My kids would hate me. My family would disown me. I'd have to, like, what's worse? Like, what's pain? What pain is worse? And one was probably easier for me, and the other one would be, harder for everybody. So I think that's when I realized this is not an option. Having these thoughts and just trying to decide if which of these is correct. I knew that was it. Couldn't be like this. But the courage to come out came from other people who I met when I moved to San Diego. I was consulting there and flying back and forth, and so someone just asked me. We were just chatting. I was like, "Oh, my wife and kids are coming this weekend." They're like, "Oh, I thought you were gay," but not in a mean way, but like just like, "Oh, I just nothing wrong, but I just assumed you were gay." And then I just looked at them and said, "Well, I'm flexible."
Okay.
And they're like, "Oh, okay." And they were like, I didn't never. That was the first time someone else, I think because I was around these people who were really uptight, would never just be honest about stuff. They just said it what they thought, and I was like, oh, like maybe it's okay to be me. Maybe I won't be ostracized. Maybe we'll make it if I do this. I don't know what's going to happen or if we'll stay together by just admitting this, but yeah, that's kind of where the shift went. Maybe it went to a dark place, and then it came from a place of like, you know what, it isn't as bad as maybe I think it's going to be.
Yeah, well, so with that, and I love that you just dropped our word there for our shift, but I want to hear, so you decided to leave being a principal, and so all this from an outside perspective or from a very futuristic perspective seems to all have happened at the same time, where you're like, I need a giant shift in my job, I need a giant shift in who I am, I need it all to happen at the same time. But was it slow and steady, like when you were in that moment?
Oh no, I think I'm sort of like the all in kind of person. Once I left being a principal, and I didn't say this, I had decided I didn't want to be a principal anymore, but I needed something to do. So my wife and I at the time did a gym, which seems like the perfect switch, right? Build a brick and mortar gym. So I was doing that and finishing up the principalship as I was building that, and then I got was working for a foundation, and I really hated the work. Just didn't like my boss. It wasn't inspiring. It was easy money and lots of money, and I was like, "This is not interesting." So I told somebody I was working with, "Look, I just don't want to do this anymore." He said, "Come back to San Diego. You can have this job here at the school." And so I did, and that's when it all started shifting. I started making choices that were for me. Like, I'm not doing this because it's the safe route. It's a good route, good 401k route. Once I opened up that floodgate, I just started changing. So I went back in the classroom. So I wasn't a principal. People were like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, yeah, I don't know. Like, why not? So I think everything started to shift once I opened my mind that you don't have to be the thing that you thought you were or live the way you thought you should. You can actually just change your mind. You
And
can
little did you
change
know you were
really.
like writing this backstory and platform that literally would launch the rest of your career. Is that like so surreal to look back on, seeing it now, like step by step?
Yeah, because they didn't come without its bumps. I mean, just because you shift doesn't mean it doesn't get to be rosy. Like
Yeah.
that business was right before the economy crashed, and that totally brought us to bankruptcy. Lost everything. Lost everything I had. Um, but my shift was different now, so I wasn't thinking that I couldn't get out of it because I mean, I eventually, came out to my kids. It was something that my wife and I felt strongly about. We don't want our kids to think that we were hiding things from them. It may not make sense to elementary age kids, and it was really hard for them to accept their parents who were separating and moving on. Um, Being gay was not the hardest part of it all. It was being not the family they knew. But what started to shift was that I started to let go of an old story. My perspective did change. So now I saw a possibility that I didn't see before. I just saw one path. If you stay the course, do what you're told, become a superintendent. I got offers to be superintendent. I was like, this is going to be my life. I'm going to have to live this out until I retire, and then I guess till I die. So that shift helped open up so many things.
It's like hard to know where to like start with this question, but like there's so many people out there, and whether it's like being terrified to death of coming out, or whether it's like not knowing where to start your book, or whether it's, being an artist and being afraid to quit your job. Have there been some lessons and mindsets that stand out across these different aspects of life that if you only knew, back then, or if you can share them with someone going through one of these things now, are there things that would help someone through these big leaps that you can share?
I think the first thing I learned was I'm not my thoughts. I think I thought I was my thoughts. Whatever I imagined in my head was true. So that was really something to let go of. But I also didn't see my unique value in the world because I never was a very good teacher, to be honest. Maybe I was good. That's probably not a fair assessment. After being a principal, I saw plenty of people that weren't good, but I was never great. And part of it was maybe I didn't totally belong in that system. It just didn't, it was so difficult to survive and be the person always poking the box. So also realizing that I have a unique gift that belongs in the world, it doesn't mean I have to be doing this thing that I was doing to share it. So like when I look for people in their writing, I'm looking for what makes them uniquely them. And most people don't see their uniqueness. They don't see and understand themselves in the way that other people do. And so like we see each other, I always give this metaphor for people is when you see somebody who has an attractive figure, you see they're beautiful. And usually you see is their muscles, there's, wow, that's beautiful. Like the way they're fit and all these things. And we think that the muscles on someone is what makes them look attractive. But very rarely does someone look at someone and go, man, what beautiful ligaments. And check out her connective tissues. And I think, but the funny thing is muscles only exist for those ligaments to pull and retract. The muscle serves that purpose. It is the muscle. It's the thing behind the great things. The strength comes from what connects you. So I think most people don't notice that about themselves either. They don't see how amazing they are and what they have to offer, because when was the last time said, let's stop and look at you and think about what makes you unique and great? And most of us think of all the things in our life and we don't think of them as unusual because we live in our body 24/7. We live our lives. We don't think, wow, you lived through that or you did that. You're like, yeah, it's really not that big of a deal. But the truth is, it's maybe the action or the activity or the thing wasn't a big deal, but who you are through it is. It's what makes you unique. It's why you're able to be who you are. And everyone has it. It's the thing I wanted to do in schools is teach people to look for these things and not tell people how to diagram sentences and how to prepare for a test. I just didn't see value in that. So I really struggled because all I wanted to do was see young people thrive and be happy with what they were doing. And so many times I didn't do that when I should have.
Well, so are there lines there? So I know as a doula for me, like there's a lot of lines that cross over into like, are you a therapist or are you doing what you're supposed to be doing? And do you kind of like hit walls with some clients where you're like, maybe this is out of my wheelhouse, like this is getting too into a place that needs work? Or are you always just like turning them back towards their own story? Like, what can you do to help this? Like what's your process with that?
Most of the time it's when someone's story is so rich that they can't see it for themselves, or it brings anxiety, or it brings, as the book, The War of Art says, it brings the resistance. I remind people that that they aren't their story. They aren't the things that they've told themselves. So, but they do have to see what made them unique through it. And so one woman I've been helping for a while, this is her third time trying to write this book, and she wanted to write a book to grow as a leader, thought leader, but that's not the book that makes her amazing. What makes her amazing is this courageous confidence that she has that doesn't seem like she should have, but she has it in abundance. And a lot of her confidence came from her really hard life. And she doesn't often share that with people because she doesn't want people, she's constantly tried to protect herself from her story. But the truth is her story has made her who she is. And the more she owns it, the more she'll be able to be herself. So I want people to be themselves. I want people to understand that they are exactly who they need to be, even though life maybe has dealt them some things that they didn't expect or deserve. So people have said, wow, this has felt like an amazing year of therapy in one session. I don't understand what happened right now. I'm more than one, 8 out of 10 people will often cry in those sessions. And I'm not trying to do anything, but I'm trying to just hold up a mirror and get them to look at themselves and to care enough about their story. Because the book process is for them. I always tell authors, the book is for you. The gift to the world is that it's done and you get to share it. But if it's not for you, then if it doesn't transform you, it has no hope to transform anyone else.
So what? Sorry.
Oh, sorry, Chelsea. Go ahead.
Well, I wanted to ask you with that early process, because I know just in your website and sort of how you reach out to up and coming authors, it's a lot about, do you even just have an idea in your head? Let's work with that. Like, what are your first steps you give people when they first start working with you? I mean, you don't have to give me all your, insider tips and secrets. But when someone just has like an idea and they don't even have an outline, they haven't written anything yet, but they're just like, I think I'm on to something. Where do you even start with that?
Yeah, I try to use a visual process. I think visual processing is a really great way for people to see things, because outlines are the things that kills books. And I know that a lot of my writing coach friends would disagree, and I'm glad they disagree, because we just have a different process. But outlines create anxiety and a fixed mindset about what this book is. I don't want them to think of what a book is before we even let the idea grow. So I often make people visualize it using symbols or words or thought bubbles. I don't want them to get concrete about it. I want them to just unpack what's in their head, because we have a certain amount of knowledge and a certain amount of things that live in our conscious mind, like what we know. I'm more interested in what's in the subconscious. So typically what I'm looking for is things that they don't even know, the connections, because our brain is like makes meaning, firing every different direction, making connections between things. So I use a more creative process. So I want to first get their idea on the page, empty their head. I want to see what's in their head about this idea before they commit to what it is. So I basically make them do a visual map around what they think this book could be. And then I just ask questions and I take notes to try to extract what I think I hear them say, and make meaning about things that aren't concrete yet. So that's the first thing, is empty people's heads. I go, you have to start thinking on a page outside of your head. You can't think about a book in your head, because you're constantly refining and changing and making meaning, but we can't see that. So I need to see it. So that's the first thing I do, is people empty your head on a page so everybody else can see, because it's going to be kind of messy. And that's the hope. It should be messy. It shouldn't be perfectly outlined in your head. Some people that are very linear, that's the way they think. So I know this is a hard process, but I really like them to empty their head first on a page. That would be the first step, so that it's clear, because you don't want any books hidden behind a book. Just like the description I give people is like when you go bowling, we were bowled and you throw a pin and you hit the perfect ball and you knock the pin out of the way, but there's another pin right behind it. And you're like, oh man, I didn't see that. You get so upset. Well, that's the way book writing can be. If you're not careful, there's multiple pins. There's like 20 pins behind that one pin that you just can't see. So my job is to help make sure you're working on the book that you should be working on now, because everybody has so many books in them. So my job is to make sure that I see that before they start, so that the book behind it doesn't get in the way.
So I think a lot of people, a lot of creative people especially, like kind of get stuck because they feel like they have a message, whether it's a painter or a poet or a writer or whatever it may be. But people get stuck because they're like, well, I'm a grown up. What's the point? Why am I going to sit there and write or paint a pretty picture or learn a song on guitar? And one thing that's from an outside perspective for most people looking in would see the past, I don't know, 5 years of your life, and you not only reinvented yourself from every which way, but you managed to make and are making a successful business on many levels, public speaking and authoring and coaching and all these different avenues that you're taking. And you've created quite a name for yourself. And I know a lot of that is with direct intention and very intelligent strategizing. And to say it in a easy way to express it, you're like a master schmoozer, and you've become like, you're great at networking and being everywhere and being in front of and with the right people. People like Pat Flynn and people that are entrepreneurial icons. Can you tell me how that came about? Because I know that definitely didn't happen by accident. What was like your mindset, and maybe word it in a way where people can apply it to their own situation on how to get themselves in the right place and understand that their creativity actually can lead to something.
Right. Well, that's great. I'm glad that you noticed that. Yeah, a schmoozers doesn't sound like a positive word to most people, but what I think that equates to is I was sitting in my classroom constantly thinking, I don't want to do this the rest of my life. I want to go see the world. I want to create. I want to be an author. I want to speak from stages. I started dreaming about what I wanted, and I go, sitting in here is not the way it's going to work. But I don't want to go back to school. Obviously, I don't think you learn this stuff in school. So what do I need to do? So I started just brainstorming. Well, what is it that I think I could do to get to where I see other people being? So besides like reading blogs and listening to podcasts, which I did early on, I didn't understand how they got there. Like I know people would sell courses and try to tell you this is how you get there. And I couldn't figure those things out because I didn't have anything I wanted to share. So that was what the first book was about. The Art of Apprenticeship was, how do you find a mentor that is willing to take you under their wing and guide you? One of the things I had a lot of experience in was working with people. So I said, well, that's something I can do. I can use that skill. So I basically found somebody that I admired and I wanted to learn from. And one thing you can do is, a lot of people go up to people and say, look, I would love for you to mentor me. Or the words they say are, can I just pick your brain? And that's a red
Right.
flag for successful people.
Yeah.
Because that means there's a troubling line there. So if you're thinking, oh, if I could just reach out to him, I just ask if I could just pick his brain or pick her brain. And I think that's the wrong approach. I mean, for me, I wanted to align with people who I cared about and believe in their message. So I first found out, well, what can I learn from them that doesn't require me picking their brain? So I started listening to their podcasts or reading their blog. I started paying attention to their communities. So I started learning from them first, so that I had some knowledge. And then, so that's practical. So if you're already finding somebody to follow or learn from, that's one good step. The next thing is, if you want to get close to them, stop trying to shoot for the top of the food chain. I mean, if you want to get to know somebody like Tony Robbins, don't think that you're gonna follow him around and learn from him. But I bet you the top people in his group know just as much as he does, and they probably observe more about what he does than he even knows himself. So find that second or third person and learn from them, follow them, find out who they are. That's a much easier place to begin. Like learning around people who are learning from people. Like it seems like it's an ego that says, I want to learn from the best. Well, good, but you don't need to take their time. I mean, serve them away. So another thing you do is serve their community. Like, if you're going to be in their group or their Facebook group or their public group, comments, support them, in any way you can. So the way that played out for me, so this will be practical, is, so Pat Flanagan, you mentioned him, so I'll use him as an example, runs this blog called Smart Passive Income, which is something I was trying to do. How do I not show up to work every day? I get to do my own thing. But I started to learn from him, and I realized he had a one-day sort of in-person event where he was going to take you and show you some of the things you need to do for your business. So I signed up. I paid money I didn't have. I was a teacher, not a lot of money, but with that is I realized he wanted to put your business on a hot seat and then like give you critiques about your business, your website, your monetization, all these things. I had no idea what they were talking about. In fact, I had no business whatsoever. So I had about 30 days before I was going to show up. So that's when I wrote that book in 30 days, because I needed to show up with something to share. So the day before I showed up to the event, I had sent my book off to the editor.
Whoa.
And that's what I pitched. And that's what I shared, is that, I wrote about my process about becoming, learning from others. And here's how I do it. And here's how I think people can do it. And I applied everything I was learning. I hosted an event for the people coming to that workshop who were out of town. I told Pat, hey, look, I noticed that there's people coming out of town. Do you have something for them? He's like, no, I don't. I said, well, I'd be happy to host like a meetup, happy hour for them. He's like, okay, cool. Should I go? I'm like, no, you can't go. He's like, what? I'm like, well, if you go, they're going to talk to you. They're not going to talk to each other. They need to be like more relaxed and know each other. And then when we get to the event, they won't be so uptight. He's like, oh, good point. So I was serving his community, taking a risk because I would love him to come and get to know him more.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'd be like, yes.
Please come. Yes.
But my point was, I was doing this to serve the people that were coming, not to serve myself. That was hard, but that was the right thing. And that, in fact, when I walked into the room the next day, everybody knew him, but equally, all the people that came knew me, which was kind of amazing, like level up, because now I know,
cool.
and now he knows me more than everyone. Like, so it just changed things. So that's the kind of stuff people could do to serve, like just find opportunities to serve and connect. Steve Scott, we'll have to use that. I'm trying to always.
I know, it's always everyone on here already knows him as Scott too, so you can call him whatever you want.
So Scott, referred you to me, but like that kind of, your name gets around as being the person that you should talk to.
Right, being a resource.
Yeah.
I never had a website. I never had anything for the several years I started my business, because it was all people talking well about me. And I think that's the hardest thing in starting anything business-wise or creative-wise, is be the person that people talk about in a good way.
Was that something that just came naturally to you? Because what you're saying is like, it makes sense to me and most entrepreneurs, but to most people that have like a normal 9-to-5 job with like aspirations of, I wish I did that, or someday I'll do this. Like, I don't think they realize these things, where there's certain books or mindsets that clicked in that made you realize, hey, if I can do things for others, it becomes more transactional and more of a friend thing rather than me taking.
I think I just observe. I think I spent so much time observing people,
Okay.
and I didn't want to be. I guess the word hustle wasn't. People would be surprised if I think I don't like the hustle. I didn't like the connotation that meant I was out to get something that would take away from you. My idea was, what could I do that would support this person, and also, in the long run, benefit me. Like, obviously I had an intention. I was making. I wanted to be in that circle as quickly as possible. So I got
Right.
invited back to that event the next year, and I was the one that hosted the big party. So for I was the big person. So it went from being no one, being a teacher who didn't have anything, to the very 6 months later being the guy that everyone got introduced to at Pat's level. I was like, wow, that's amazing. But it's humbling. But I think the books that made impact on me were people that were doing things differently. So the Art of Nonconformity from Chris Guillebeau really impacted me. And I got to meet him in 2013. He's the one that I told I was going to write a book because of him. And so it was just the idea that you can do things differently than people have done, and your way is just as fine. You don't have to do it everyone's way. That book really impacted me, I think, early on. And Seth Godin's work as well is like, you can choose yourself. You can stand up and you can be your own person. You don't have to wait for permission to be somebody.
So, Azul, with all of this, like, I know it's easy now to take a look at your career thus far and say, okay, there's been all these successes. Like, you make it seem easy to write a book in 30 days and then just show up with Pat Flynn and have him look at it. But I want to hear, like, what was your biggest failure / like time waster? Like, oh, there goes 6 months of my life. Like, what was the big, and this is in your current field, not being a principal and all that stuff, but in this current life, what's been your biggest, like, oh man, that was a waste of time?
You know what? Worrying about building a course, because I saw everybody building a course, really, not that it wasn't valuable, but worrying about it being good, worrying about all the pieces was probably really a waste of time, because I was trying to do what other people were doing. So like, I would have gladly built something before, like sold something to people before I built it, to see if there was any validation. And even though I read the 4-Hour Work Week and knew that I could do that, I just didn't trust that I could do it. I think it was an inner thing. I was like, no, I have to build it. It has to be really good.
Yeah.
Because I don't want my name to be on this. And if I don't do it well, then people won't like. And that actually, people are just wanting to know what it is you're offering more than anything else. Like, so that was my big, spending, thousands of dollars on making a course pretty and making it perfect, and then not selling any of it. Like, opening it up to crickets. That really sucked.
Yeah.
A lot of money down the drain, but I learned a lot from it, which is I make more money by just being myself and showing up than I do trying to create a course. That other people can't do that. They can't just show up and make money at a conference because they're there. They have to have a course that they're in their, it's nothing wrong with funnels and all this. I don't want to disparage those things, but I knew for me that I had to do it differently, because that way wasn't working for me. It wasn't the thing that I was good at yet. I was good at, like Pat Flynn said this the other day. He said, look, you're at the place, you start at the place everybody aspires to be, working with all these influencers and having them know your name. And they're all working backwards from the bottom with like small courses working up. And you just start at the top. So, because I don't know if you ever need to descend back down. Like, I think you should stop thinking like that. I'm like, oh, so I don't have to make a course.
Yeah. And it's comforting also to hear sometimes that the magic, like, funnel, because every podcast or every blogger has to talk about these funnels and all these courses, and these are the quick ways to make money. But I think when you are selling your story and your personality and all of that, it's not always strategic. It's not always as like, I'm going to put together this mathematical formula to make money. It's a little bit more about like, I need to put myself out there. Like, this is who I am and this is my story. And then people follow. Like, that's more interesting to me anyway.
Yeah, I think, and I was telling this, I think that I met Brian Smith from Boots, and I think you know him as well. But the thing that was interesting about his story is some super successful people don't always have a clear path. And that was hard. I came from a really, structured thing. Everything was told for you by the minute. The bell rings, kids go here. It was so structured, and to have something not be able to figure it out, I wanted something structured to figure it out, so I could just do what everybody else does and put my course in there, and people will go there and buy it, and I'll make lots of money online, and won't it be great? but the thing was, is I wasn't showing up for me. So I couldn't even see the opportunity. It was always right in front of me because I was worried about everybody else. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't have a course. I think courses are valuable. I've taken lots. I've bought lots of them. Some I've never finished, but I have bought a lot of courses. But I think the other thing I didn't see is I didn't see how valuable just being myself was, and realizing that I can build something from that value. So like here's an example. So people wonder, well, great. So now I'm exchanging my time for money because I'm a coach. Well, the thing that came out of it naturally was people wanted to say, I want to get my book published. What should I do now? Is they needed help and support with publishing their book, either writing a proposal or publishing services. So then in 2019, we're launching our publishing house, which is helping people direct publish so that they can be in control of their royalties, but still get support or have some sort of revenue share in the royalties. That way, now it's something I can build that doesn't need me in the business every day. So I can have people who are managing it, people who can help the author get through it. But I'm building that, but I don't have to. That's my monetization that doesn't require me, and I can keep doing what I do really well or what I enjoy.
Yeah, unlocking that side of the business is always like that big moment of like, I figured out how to make money without having to, make every penny with my face and being there and being present. That's awesome. I want to talk to you a little bit about Steve, just because I know you guys work together a lot, and I want to hear what projects you guys are working on together at the moment, and then where he is with some of his. I know he's doing a podcast now. Is he writing a book? Like, what are you guys? Tell me about all of your current travels, etc.
Yeah. So yeah, Steve and we've gotten interviewed on podcasts that had nothing to do with book writing, asking how did two people that are married work in the same business and each other.
Yeah.
So when we left Shanghai, I was working a traditional job, and so was he. And when we left, we went all in to work together, even though we weren't totally ready as far as as a business plan. But what we've been doing together is we held our first in-person workshop in San Diego a few months ago, and we loved it. We worked well together. He's he's actually a better writer than I am by far. He just finished his book that he's going to be releasing, and his podcast Soul and Stories is doing really well. He's such a strong intuitive. He has such a wonderful presence around people, but he's, I think, hidden himself behind a mask, behind a perception that other people have of him, and he's finally opening up to that. So he's continuing to help coach people, authors as well, and working on building out the business that we run together, which is coaching and the publishing. But one of the big things that we're going to be doing is holding a retreat, which is more of a transformational writing retreat where people go away to somewhere, a destination like Tuscany or Portugal or something like that, where they get away, but also get connected with other people, like-minded people, to help kind of work through the blocks, because blocks are the biggest thing that prevent writers, because 81% of Americans say they have a book inside of them, according to, I think, the New York Times, but only 3% of people who say that ever write a manuscript.
Whoa, that's a crazy statistic.
Yeah, but only of those 3% who finish a manuscript, only 30% ever publish. So it's like a fraction of 1% that ever put books out there. Even though it seems like, because we have friends that all writers, it's like, oh yeah, everyone does it. No, it's such a small percentage.
I mean, it's hard. Yeah.
Oh, it's hard. It's painful. So we work together to help people, and we're going to do a retreat coming up in 2019. So that's some of the stuff we're doing together, and super proud of him.
Talking about Steve, didn't he have a similar story where he was also married to a woman, and then you guys kind of met in a very interesting way?
Yeah, so both of us were married. We, didn't want to let our family down. I had children, but Steve had not. He was about 4.5 years younger than me, 4 years younger than me. So he had not yet started down that path. But when he came out, I think he was 32, and I met him when he was 34. We met at a coming out group. His wife was super supportive of him as well as mine about figuring ourselves out. It was both of our wives that actually encouraged us to go to this coming out group at the LGBT Center.
It's amazing.
Which is kind of ironic. Yeah. And so we both went reluctantly. He had been a couple times before because he had been trying to date people, but they didn't want to date someone who's still kind of attached to their wives, which makes sense. But that man felt really lonely. Like he's going to leave his wife, but not going to be alone, be with anybody. And I was like, okay, my wife and I agreed to split up. I agreed to raise the kids because she spent a lot of years being a soccer mom when she didn't want to be that. So I'll take a teaching job. I'll raise the kids. And now I'm a single gay dad, but I'm just stuck at home. I don't know what to do about this coming out thing. So we went to this group, and we met at that group. And I just fell head over heels for him. And you're not supposed to date in that group. So that was the only time we ever went to that coming out group.
Got what you needed and you left. That's fine.
Right. So his process was a little bit longer. It was a little harder separation between he and his spouse, but it was really a great to find someone that kind of understood where you're at. And it just happened to be that we connected as well.
So my favorite shift in your story is that you went from possibly, living in Austin the rest of your life to be principal superintendent on this path to traveling to every country in the world. So talk to me about how that has just been so eye-opening for you. And are you ready to settle down again? Or are you like, I'm never going to stop traveling?
Well, it's interesting. One of the things I knew I wanted to do once I started coming out and all the shifts started happening in my life was like, I want to see the world. So traveling was something I didn't do. I didn't afford myself the luxury of doing that. So for the last year and a half, well, in Shanghai, we lived in 2 years in Shanghai, but even after that, we've been traveling all over the world. And, because we built a life that we can live with our laptops, we've been this year alone. I think Dominican Republic, and we spent 3 weeks in New Zealand traveling with our son. We took Steve's parents to Portugal and to Hawaii. We took my mom, country where her family's from. She had never been to Europe, and all over, Europe for a month. It's been great to travel the world and see things. Do I want to settle down? I want to be able to have a place called home. Home has been wherever we've used just one check bag together. So like having the same 7 shirts and whatever has been different. But I think for us, we realize, home is something we really need. And so that's something we're growing in. And home doesn't have to be one particular place. So we still have a house in Portugal that we go to. That's where our car is. But we also wanted to have somewhere where it could be more permanent. So that's why we picked San Juan, because it's so beautiful. The beach is right here. The water's warm. It's close to our family, close enough, like no farther than going from the East Coast to West Coast. It's, right in the middle as far as distance. So, but this will allow us to travel to South America from here and Central America because it's a really easy place, and all the Caribbean for now. And we'll figure out what's next in the future.
So do you have that book in you, like your memoir? Are you going to do that someday? Like your story?
People ask me that, and I was like, I hope so. I have to find, my own coaches sometimes, because I think of it. I'm like, it's not really that interesting. Like, what would I say?
Oh my God.
Oh my God. So how do you coach yourself through that? Because like everyone else sees that, and then you're telling me it's...
And you're not working with people that you're like, wow, my story is so much more interesting than this, and yet they're putting this into a book. Like, you don't have those moments?
No, I always think, this is not that interesting.
Come on, dude.
Oh my gosh,
no
you're
way.
nuts.
Not for a book. Honestly, not for a book. So, but I think that will probably be something that has to come out, because it's something that I'm teaching people to do. There's a couple other books I'm working on now that I want to get out of me. One is the book about the same title as my podcast, Born to Write, because I really think I want to teach people about this transformational process that you go through when you write something, because I really believe in that. And so, but yeah, I think memoirs, as you know, Jay, are really hard, and they require you to show up. And I think I'm ready to show up. I want to make sure I pay homage to the books I've started, because I can easily start too many things.
So this is like your 10th bowling pin back there somewhere.
Right.
Nice.
Got it.
Nice throwback.
I have to write them down. Nicely done. Yeah, for sure. The reason, this other book about what makes a good teacher great, I'm trying to finish because of the fact that I'm speaking about this. It'll be the second time I've been paid to do this speech. And I'm like, they're asking, so will you do your book signing? I'm like, oh, so I need to write this book now because I have to have a book signing.
So for me, like, writing has been challenging on so many levels. Like, I thought my book, when I first met you, was going to be like a 3-month project, and it's been close to, I don't know, a couple of years now, 2 or 3 years. It's somewhat embarrassing, but I'm also kind of proud that I've stuck with it. Through that, talking to you, you know that a lot of it's been very hard for me to kind of talk about a lot of different things. Can you talk about some things that would be really difficult for you to write. Could you share some of those to be vulnerable and kind of get it out there? Or could you coach yourself as though you were a client of yours trying to get through those moments? Because you've gotten me through a lot of really tough obstacles that have been challenging, and I've had a couple tears shed on Skype with you over the past couple years.
Anything about my children makes me feel really vulnerable because
Right.
I want to protect them at all costs. You know how having kids makes you
Totally.
different. But watching your children go through hardship is really hard. Um, so that would probably be hard for me. Like all the things happened at once. Like, so I leave the country to go live in China. My son goes to college. It's really hard for him. He doesn't love school. He's never liked school. That would be hard to write about. He was the kid at second grade that used to run out of the building, and I was the principal. They'd call me and say he's around again. I'd drive in over from my next town just to go drag him into school. He hated school. So like just the idea of school has always been hard for him because he's not a conformist, and I think being a principal, I always felt like he needed to be, but I feel bad about that. That would be some challenging stuff. My failures as a parent, like those things are vulnerable, but they're truth. They're honest. Like
Right.
I wish I was a wonderful parent. I haven't always been. I think the other thing that'd be really hard to share is just about my own beliefs about myself. Like I have the same blocks that everybody else does. Is what makes me unique is hard to see. Um, so like the struggle that my family's had with mental illness is really hard to talk about because it's not my story to tell. So you just like when you're telling your truth, they're part of you. So
Right.
you've got to be vulnerable though. You've got to be willing to say, this is hard. It's so much easier to talk about things that have happened in the past. It's so much more difficult to talk about things that are happening in the now. Um, so I think for if anybody wants to know the vulnerability part is, I know for me, I would definitely get support. Your editor, Anne, is definitely somebody that coaches me through these conversations because, man, it's really hard to do for yourself when you feel like running. That's how I feel like I'm running from this. This is too hard. Is that's usually the thing you probably should write about, the thing that people keep saying, oh, you should talk about this, or you should talk about this. I'm like, oh, I don't know. So I think those vulnerability moments come from that resistance, the feeling of, this could help somebody, but the person it probably will help the most is me.
And how would you like get someone through those obstacles? Like you said before, you were willing to like come out publicly. You literally were like considering like driving off of a cliff. And there's like probably a lot of people, whether it's coming out or whether it's like, hey, I'm living a lie. I'm not being the artist that I wanted to be, and my life is being wasted right now in this boring ass job. Like before people get to the point of like, I'm going to find a volcano to jump into, like what are some things that people can do to take to literally take a step away from the cliff?
I think one of the things you can do is find an ally, find someone to confide in and be truthful to, or a group or place where you feel comfortable. So I think social media creates a really inaccurate perception of what everyone else is thinking, feeling. So we feel we have to be validated, or we have to live our lives the way other people are. I think the first thing is finding people that are willing to listen. That's a really big shift for me. And it was hard for me to hear that the millionaires that still feel like they're not where they want to be, or they feel like, oh my God, everything could collapse. You think, oh, you think that too? So like first getting somebody that you can confide in and be yourself to, that to me is the hardest part. And I think that's why I always sit in a very sacred place. I find my role as a coach sacred. I've been called, it's funny enough, I've been called a book doula, which is kind of interesting.
Ah, you are. Yes.
Or the book whisperer, or whatever things they've called me. That my truth is my job is to do what I didn't do for a long time, which is listen. I'm listening in ways that most people don't. So my superpower isn't creating a course that converts. My superpower is listening. And so I want people to find someone that can listen, and understand and have empathy and get the fact that I believe deep in my heart, because this is the way I always felt about students, is that everyone is meant to write a book or tell their story or share themselves. We're built this way. We've been scribbling on cave walls. We've been sitting around fires telling people story. We're made to make connections. No other creature on earth can do this. And yet we're terrified to be ourselves. And so I want people to just be comfortable sharing themselves with each other.
I know, like from talking to you, one of your one of your exercises was like finding an avatar for my book. Like, who am I writing to? And I know that you've told me that you have an avatar that you write to. Are there different avatars that you have for the different aspects of what you do? Like, do you have an avatar for coaching, for public speaking, for parenting? Like, how do you apply that to other aspects of what you're doing to find purpose and fulfillment?
Yeah, that's a great question. I try to think of who's the person, because avatar sounds like something, what is that? In a book, I would say it's an ideal reader. But if outside of a book, if it's just creative, I say, who do you want to spend 5 hours on the couch having a conversation with? Who would you care enough to want to spend that amount of time with? And that's who you create for. You want that person to get you and you to get them. And you want to create something as much to exclude people as you do include them. Because if you create something for everyone, then it's really something for no one. So you want to create with with somebody in mind. Somebody, I think, in a book, I think of who do you want to have that conversation with? The book isn't the entire conversation. It's just the 5 hour, put your feet up on the couch kind of conversation with coffee or tea or wine or something. That's the person I focus on when I'm creating something, because I want to spend more time with people like that. I'm hoping to exclude people that would judge me or criticize me. And I don't think of those people when I'm creating it. In fact, I try to make it so that those people that would actually don't find me or a little bit repelled by what I'm teaching. Um, so like that's one of the things is I do have a different focus for each of my projects. When I go to speak, if I'm speaking to an audience, I actually try not to speak to teachers that are disgruntled. I really think I know they're going to be an audience, but I try to speak to the one that will go, yes, yes, yes. I'm not trying to persuade the ones that would say no to say yes. And I think that's hard because I'm not trying to win them over. I'm actually trying to push them away. But I want the people that get it to go, gosh, I really want to take action, or I really feel inspired to do something because of what you said. That's the hope. So it just depends on what I'm focusing on. And I think that's the biggest advice I ever got from one of my friends, Charlie Hohen, who actually he wrote an incredible book called Play It Away about how he cured his anxiety through play, because he burnt out. He was Tim Ferriss's first employee. He worked for him 3 years, and he went all balls to the wall, and then found himself in such anxiety ridden, so much paranoia that he couldn't even leave the house because he felt people were going to get him. So he taught me a lot about what you should do when you're building something. He goes, I want you to write down everything, who you don't want to work with. And once you're clear about that, that's when who you want to work with, they'll start to emerge more and more, because you have to repel the people that you don't want to work with.
It's so complicated because I think even in building my first business, it's like that's the first big lesson you have to learn is that, yes, you're scrounging to get the gig or get the, impress everyone. But at the same time, like if you don't have the power to fire your own clients and say like, this is just a really bad fit, like this is so applicable in everything. It's like Jay's going to paint what he paints, and we've had people be like, but the angles don't make sense, why do you do that? And Jay's just like, well, I do it, you don't have to be a fan, like move on, it's no big deal. And I think it's important for people to remember, like it's actually not of much value to please everyone. Like you have to really find your place and be true to that and move forward. There's more power there, I think.
I think that happened. I had to stop imitating people. That was really hard. In first, imitation is flatter, but then after a while, you got to find your own groove. And I think I think the thing that helped me the most was watching my car get towed away, being repossessed, thinking, how am I going to get my kids to school tomorrow? And, we're playing like, let's collect cans so we can get money to eat. I go, this is not the life I thought I'd have, or the life I even had a year ago. Because failure taught me a lot about the fact that the worst that can happen is you stand back up and try again. So I think a lot of people are too afraid that, well, if I do that, then this bad thing might happen. Yeah. And that's that internal voice I was telling you about there, like that your thoughts aren't truth, but we make them true. We live them out. So I think people taking risks doesn't mean you have to risk everything. I'm not saying I would never want people to repeat my mistake. But what I'm saying is you got to realize that not everything that goes wrong is you. It's just part of life. It's a circumstance that happens.
Yeah. And as you know, like when you first came into our world, like it was one of our biggest failures so far with a brand new business. And
yeah, I mean, I met I met Azul right after we had an art gallery that closed, and we lost like
I don't
$60,000 or
know. Yeah, it
something,
was
and
bad.
we
Yeah.
had newborns that we weren't able to work, and I was completely broke. And you were talking about getting your like car repossessed. Like, you had no money saved up? You just took this ginormous leap and had no safety net?
Nope, I had no safety net. I think that's the thing that maybe has maybe separated. I don't have a fear that things won't work out. I believe they will. It doesn't mean I don't like failure. I hate failure. But like I remember when I wanted to move from LA to Austin, I didn't have a job and I didn't want it to take forever. So I bought a book on how to sell your house in 5 days, which seemed like a scam, but I read it anyways and did what it said. And I put ads in the paper. This is before internet, where you'd actually could do everything on the internet.
Mhm.
And I put yard signs up in my house and in my neighborhood and opened my house out, as best I could, staged it, and auctioned my house off to the highest bidder. It literally had a piece of paper that said,
Wow.
put your highest bid down. And by the end of the weekend, I sold my house. I
Jesus.
got all the paperwork for how to file it, just like a realtor would. Like I learned all the technical things for putting it in escrow, but I sold it in a weekend. And the thing about it is that I sold it because I didn't want to have a way out. Like, oh, I'll just come back if it doesn't work out. Because I didn't have a job in Austin either. Rented an RV one way and shipped my car, so I couldn't turn back. And I showed up to Austin and I had a place rented for 30 days and that was it. And I had 30 days to figure out where I was going to work, what we're going to do. Yeah, I don't operate with a safety net most of the time. Doesn't mean that's wise. It just means because I've not done that, it doesn't feel scary to do it. A lot of people have a safety net. Good, you have a cushion, but also it could be really easy to go, oh, I can't do this because this is my safety net. My cushion's getting small. Like I can't take a risk because now you have a safety net you won't ever use. Then
Yeah.
that's defeating the purpose as well.
Yeah, that can actually be like debilitating when you really think about it. So this has been amazing. Azul, you've been such a huge part of our life for the last 2 years, even if you don't realize it. Just
Oh,
from afar, we appreciate you.
Yeah, sincerely.
Yes. I have one
thank
last
you. I love you both.
question.
I love you too, man.
So we always ask everyone. So if I had to drop you back in your childhood kitchen, what's the first thing you think of?
Rice Krispie treats.
Ooh.
Okay.
So who made them? You? Family?
No, I like to cook. That was as close to cooking as I'd get, but it's just something my mom would make. It just made me think of like a quick treat that you're not supposed to have. It's really not, this is, but I don't know. That came to my head. Is I think I was raised on like that era of the 70s food. Those is kind of things that were like a luxury that we didn't get very often. So that's what popped in my head.
Yeah, I haven't had a Rice Krispie treat in probably 20
Oh my
years.
God, so long.
Well, this has been amazing. Thank you so much, Azul. Do you want to give some shout outs for where people can find you and all that
Yeah,
good stuff?
what's like coming up also? Yeah.
Yeah, they can find me at coachazul.com. That's a good place to find me. My podcast is called Born to Write, which is also there. But yeah, you can find me Azul Terronez at all social media. I know that's a hard word. Terronez is Terronez. And yeah, I always respond to my emails. I love connecting with people. I've had so much pleasure serving others because I know what it's like to start out. And it still sometimes feels like I'm just starting out. So yeah, I look forward to hearing from people and happy to help.
Can you give some shout outs for your amazing husband as well?
Yeah, Steve Vanoy. You can find him. His podcast is called Soul and Stories, which is really great. I think you guys have such great alignment with the work you're doing. So you can find him on social media at Steve Vanoy, as well as soulandstories.com.
Awesome. And I do recommend their social media just for the travel photos alone. You can
Seriously.
hop on those live videos on Facebook. It's one of my favorite things to follow. So
I'd like to throw in before we finish that after like a many year journey that I believe that I'm about 2 months away from having all the edits done with my book, and I hope we can get back on and maybe share more of that once it happens. But what seemed like a journey that will never end, our our editor friend Anne claims that will be done pretty soon, which is is shocking. I know it's probably been a huge challenge to work with me. So thank you for your patience on this long journey. I feel very proud of myself for coming this far with it, and it's definitely thanks to you, brother.
Thank you. I look forward to it. I can't wait for everybody to read it. And for this new draft, I've read your book a couple of times, and I always look forward to reading them. So I look forward to reading this version. And I'd love to talk more about that process, because that's worth its own conversation. We'll have you on the Born to Write podcast, and we can unpack it.
Awesome. Thanks, bro.
Thanks, Azul.
Thank you.
Talk to you later.
Love you much.
Love you too.
Thank you so much for listening, guys. We appreciate you. If you like what we're doing, could we ask you to go to iTunes and leave us a nice review and rating? It really helps us and helps other people to know that we're providing a good podcast for you. If you'd like to find us on social media, you can find us at Shifting Perceptions Podcast. You can find my artwork at jalders.com or me on social media at jalders. You can find my beautiful wife, Chelsea, on ommamasdoulas.com or on social media at ommamasdoulas. And if you'd like to join our newsletter or find episodes online with show notes, you can go to shiftingperceptionspodcast.com. Until next week, talk to you then. See you guys. Thanks so much. One more quick little note. Thank you to Kevin Rigby from Wavelight Studio for shooting our photographs for the podcast. And also special thanks to our friend John Harvey, who created the theme music for our show. We love you guys a lot.